Hey everyone, welcome back to another devlog for A Rogue's Odyssey, my roguelike dungeon crawler that I'm developing with the Godot engine. Today I will be focusing on a new main mechanic that I'm adding to the game, a light mechanic. Keep in mind that these values are not final. So there's a light level that starts at 99 and decreases by 6 after each room is completed. From 99 to 66, the threat level is 1, from 65 to 33 it's 2, and less than that it's threat level 3. The light value and threat level are shown on the left side of the screen. For now, as the threat level increases, the screen gets slightly darker and the enemies are stronger. They have tiers corresponding to the threat level, and have extra HP and speed, and have some unique bonuses like the spider wing shoots more often the higher the tier. It's worth noting that the enemy tiers don't directly correlate to the threat level. However, the threat level affects the probability of the tiers. The higher the threat level, the higher the probability of an enemy being of a higher tier. The enemies also drop rewards if they are tiers 2 and 3. I made a different coin that's worth 3 gold. Tier 2 enemies drop 1, and tier 3 enemies drop 2 of them. The Spider Queen is always the same tier as the threat level, and drops 2 crystals on death, plus 1 for each tier. It's been a while, but I didn't get much progress done on some of these days, so here's a boring but fulfilling update. I've been thinking of the best way to regain the light value, and decided to add a drop to do so. I settled on making some sort of fuel to keep the light on, so I added a lamp to the player sprite. And since I was doing that, I also added the backpack to have a lamp on. First I tried to make the lamp a standalone sprite and having it swing along the player's movement, but I was overcomplicating it too much and was having issues with it, so I just added it to the sprite itself. And since this looked fine, I'm just gonna leave it like that. A few days later, I made the lamp oil sprite and added it to the game, which was fairly quick and ended up looking alright. Next, I added a way to transition to a new area. I made an area similar to the overworld one, but with a new stairs sprite, and when you interact with it, it will trigger the events function that changes scenes. I also added a string variable to it so I can change the text. The issue now is that a lot of data wasn't coming through to the level. The UI resets, the stats reset. This was both awful to deal with and great to learn what not to do next time. So the next couple of days I worked on fixing this issue. I made the items picked up node that also handles the cheat panel an autoload, which means that it is now a global node. I also made the UI an autoload, which makes sense since it's something that will persist throughout the game and shouldn't be affected by changing scenes. Finally, I moved all the player stats that can be affected by items to the player stats autoload, where they should have been in the first place. I also had to keep my player in between scenes, or else its reference would be null in some cases, since it got deleted and was now a new node. To fix this, I removed the player from the scene before changing it, and after loading the new one, I re-add the player as a child. Here we are, back for another update. I am now planning to make the first area fully playable with some more variety, to maybe make a small demo or proof of concept before moving on to the second area. I don't want the scope of the game to be too lengthy, because I realize I won't be able to finish it that way. I won't have enough content for 40+ minute runs like many games in the genre, without making the game too repetitive. I was thinking of having like 4 areas total. Anyway, first off, I looked for some assets on each without an idea in mind, just looking for stuff that would fit my game's theme. I found this asset that made me bat an eye. Get it? Bat an eye? Cause it's a bat. I immediately yoinked it and made my changes. I changed the shading and color palette to fit my art. I added a few changes to the overall look and added a couple of frames to have 4 frames total, like most of my enemies. On the day after, I added the bat to Godot and set it up accordingly. This wasn't much of a hassle, especially since it's a very simple enemy. It just chases the player but without avoiding holes, since it can fly. Think of the spider wing, but with wings. The following day, I saw a nice little pack for a 2D platformer with a few traps, and since I've been playing a lot of Spelunky 2 lately, I thought it would be a good idea to also have traps in the game. They add a lot since they're a different kind of obstacle. There's a much more methodic way of dealing with them than with enemies, and you can also use them to your advantage in some cases to damage the enemies. I decided to first add a wood block with 4 exits, each containing a spear. When the player or an enemy gets to a certain range of this area, it triggers it. The animation starts by having the arrow move out a bit of the block, and then there's a small window for you to move out of the way before it fully comes out and activates the hitbox. Today, the final day, I added another trap, the Spike Cyclone. It deals damage on contact with the player or enemy, and I made a script to move it around. It moves in a rectangle shape and I can decide the speed and how much I want it to move. If for example I want to move it in a rectangle 3x2, I can change the width and height in the variables here and the starting direction, and it will move about that number of tiles horizontally and vertically. This means I can use it in a number of scenarios as long as I move it in a rectangle shape. After this addition, I decided it's about time to start making a few room presets, but first I need to make sure I know how I'm gonna handle them. I decided to have some spawn points in the rooms and spawn enemies from those to add some randomness on the enemy that will be spawned. The blue dots are the base spawners. Depending on your threat level, yellow and red dots will also spawn extra enemies. I also added the difficulty level for the enemies. These won't be dependent on threat level, however they will be decided by me when I'm setting up the rooms. If a room has fewer spawners or fewer traps, I might have a couple of enemies be a higher difficulty. So at this point I have 3 arrays of enemies of different difficulties in the room presets, and I will make a few room layouts with the holes and traps and then add the spawners accordingly. Now all that's left to do is actually design these rooms, which might be a lot of work, but for a devlog it isn't a lot of content. It's probably going to be very repetitive, but I will briefly show it in the next devlog. And that's about it for this one. I didn't get as much done as I'd like, but I'm trying not to force myself to work on the game if I'm not feeling it, since it will just cause me to be more and more saturated with the game. I will work on the room presets and probably try and add a few enemies or traps along the way, to also add some variety in what I'm doing. Anyway, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I hope that you learned something from this video. Till next time.